Hi, Keyvan. How are you? We missed you yesterday.
Yes, unfortunately, there was probably too much going on. But I believe at this moment we can, touch on some, maybe one or two important matters. If you please tell me, Wahid, I'm going to talking about associates, basically the sinister role of the associates in the Baha'i mafia. Because traditionally speaking, an associate is a member of a, shall we say, criminal organization, right, or a crime family, who often works in their rackets or carries out jobs, illegal in nature, definitely, to please the boss or other members. They may also be corrupt, politicians, union official, journalist, or businessmen, right? Who use basically their influence to perform, regular favors, for the mafia in return for money or other compensation. In the Baha'i mafia, nonetheless, these mohebs or associates, may be either low-level members, who haven't been made yet, so to speak. Concerning the disturbing case of Mr. Morteza Esmailpour, would you think him of a associate? How would you assess this? How would you profile this guy?
His case is more complex than people realize, and I think Hassan Ershad put a theory out there that I think is basically a correct theory. Morteza Esmailpour was most definitely an operative of the Ministry of Intelligence of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but the Ministry of Intelligence is in the hands of the government of Hassan Rouhani and this reformist bloc within the Islamic Republic. People don't realize outside of Iran that there are many factions within the IRI, and many of them are in almost in a serious competitive, serious competition for power with each other, as we saw in 2009 with the re-election of Ahmadinejad and the Green Movement, etc., etc. And when Rouhani came to power, I think the approach that he wanted to adopt towards the Baha'is, contrary to the previous approach of the Ahmadinejad government and the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, was to basically infiltrate someone with a smiley face, a friendly actor, into the midst of these people, right? And that is what they did. And it became very patently obvious because the talking points of this guy were not the regular talking points that one would expect from usual infiltrators from the Iranian government into the ranks of the Baha'is. But Rouhani, the thing is that Rouhani and his government and his entire faction are also wanting to work more closely with the Baha'is. We saw that very conspicuously during that brouhaha in 2016 when Faizeh Hashemi went to Fariba Kamalabadi's house. I wrote an article about this for Counterpunch at that time. So their approach is very different. Now, for the Baha'i establishment itself, once this got out, and especially when Hassan Ershad put this narrative out there, which I believe is a correct narrative, he nailed it. This became a liability for these people. And it became a liability for the very specific reason is, as I have been saying consistently for a while now, that there is Baha'i infiltration of the system in Iran. Not just on the governmental level, but more on the financial and economic level. This becomes a liability for the narrative that the Baha'i establishment itself is trying to push about its distance from the regime and the actors within the regime in Iran. And what Morteza Esmailpour represents is proof, living proof, that these two are in fact colluding. Now, the factions, what people usually in the West call the hardliners, are not amenable to overtly work with the Baha'is, right? Even during the height of the sanctions regime. But these Rouhani, Zarif, that entire faction of the reformers are. right? Because they're pragmatists, and also they have an interest, a long-term interest in whittling away at the power of the theocracy and the supreme leader, etc. So they threw this guy in the midst of all this, right? And he began to, take over, the social media space of the Persian language Baha'i discourse. He started pushing the human rights narratives, but this guy was never a card-carrying member of the Baha'i faith, even though there were certain points that he was being interviewed by these Persian language outlets in the West as a representative of the Baha'i community. But once it came to that point, the liability factor to all of this for the Baha'i establishment became quite conspicuous. So then they had to pull the plug on him, which they did.
Right. So you pulled him away from being an associate, right? In the sense.
Well, he wasn't any kind of associate. He was no moheb at all. He was not a Baha'i. And it was blatantly obvious.
Yes, the guy wasn't a Baha'i.
And it was blatantly obvious to anyone who had watched this guy online that this guy was definitely working for the Iranian government, but with this particular faction of it.
But Wahid, this guy actually kind of led to unearth, lots of problems with fundamentalist Baha'is. For instance, they started writing to the Spiritual Assembly, National Spiritual Assembly of the United States, as well as to the Universal House of Justice, asking opinions on how deal with this guy, because they had no idea. They were seemingly clueless, in comprehending how he got himself, how he exploited, a unique position to climb up the ladder.
This is one of the proofs we have that this guy was working for the intelligence ministry, is because these people were in fact sending a trial balloon, by putting Morteza Esmailpour into the ranks of the Baha'is on social media. They're also testing waters. They're trying to understand the dynamic of all this, what the fissures are, who the actors are, what they're, where they stand on various issues. So this was a Morteza Esmailpour, with no question, was an operation of the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence.
But you agree that at the end of the day, seems that Morteza Esmailpour, sort of succeeded, in outbraining, the Iranian Baha'is.
Well, because these people are dumb. They're stupid.
Yes, that's true. How did it come to pass, Wahid? How did it come to pass?
I would say it came to pass back in the 1860s. That this train has been going along in this direction because look, the Baha'is. Hyphen Baha'i organization is a cult, and people who abandon their cognitive and ratiocinative processes in their mind at talking points and dogma, etc., always end up making themselves stupid, and so it is very easy at that point to outwit these people. Okay, we're talking about the rank and file. And this is why these people keep, when it comes to major games like this, major geopolitical games of the kind that the IRI played, using Morteza Esmailpour as the pawn.
And the IRI, they outsmart them.
Yeah, they outsmarted them. And by the time these people realized that they were being played, it was too late. But by the same token, when you look at the actual evidence, what was Morteza Esmailpour actually doing? He was helping these people. Okay.
Apparently.
Well, at least on the level of advertising, on the level of pushing along their talking points, he was helping these people. But who this was actually benefiting became obvious over a period of time. That it was actually benefiting the side of Rouhani and the Rouhani government, against the faction of the hardliners, etc. Now, in the past, the Baha'is have had no problem in being drawn into these games, into these factional wars within the Islamic Republic of Iran, as we saw in 2009 during that whole green fracas, where all of a sudden there was a whole outpouring of support by the Baha'i organization and individual rank and file Baha'is for the green movement in Iran and what happened after that election. But in this particular case, because it got so blatant and this guy got so close to them, and then all of a sudden is being pushed forward as some kind of an official spokesperson and representative of the Baha'i organization, it got too much. So they had to pull the plug.
Yes, and in this particular case, I believe the Universal House of Justice, time and again pointed out to the special importance attached to the whole organization, of the Baha'i mafia. Meaning that the Baha'is, they are required to succumb their wills quite conclusively to the organization, and break with wills, What is the big deal with the organization? It seems that the whole so-called religion, this quote-unquote religion, can easily be reduced to an organization, right?
Well, the organization, is basically to keep the rank and file in check, because the organization in many ways is a smokescreen for other activities that are going on, economic. Great example, I cited this last night with Matt and Steve, is the fact that you have people like Farzam Kamal Abadi who are acting in the capacity of negotiators for this Iran-China deal that the Rouhani Zarif government has just negotiated, which in my opinion is the biggest capitulation by any Iranian government since Turkmenichi and treaties of Golestan in the 19th century, because this is effectively, and we haven't even seen the terms of this. This is essentially handing over the Iranian economy over to Chinese capitalism for the next 100 years, maybe less.
That's right. And finally, certainly, we'll be talking more and more about the suspicious death of your, late wife. I believe, regarding the anomalies going on with the death of Roya, your wife. For instance, when your wife was allegedly killed, by person or persons unknown, nothing has come out of the Baha'i mafia,
They make no statement. This is extremely suspicious. Now, from what I've been able to gather in my conversations with a member of the German Bundeskriminalamt, which is the German equivalent to the FBI or the Australian Federal Police, he was talking off the record and emphasized that he didn't want his identity publicized. He believes that the following has occurred: that we were targeted in Germany by the far right, and that is a lot of that was our own fault, because Roya and I both put a massive target on ourselves in a part of Berlin that was not part of the general milieu of Berlin that is left wing and progressive, etc. We were actually in the most redneck part of Berlin, and this was in the Niederschönhausen district of Pankow, which is the most northern suburb of Berlin. This is the same district of Berlin that in the 2017 election, federal election of Germany, that district changed hands from being equally proportioned between the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the Linke, the left party, to overnight flipping over to the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the far-right party, that won 90 seats. This district of Berlin was the only district in the entirety of the Bundesland, or the province of Brandenburg, that got a sizable AfD majority, right? Occurring in the eastern part of Berlin, having been part of East Berlin before the wall. Our story started pretty much, I would say, consistently from around the end of 2014, when Roya and I began to become more active in our street. Things came to a head in early 2015, where early morning, we hear all this commotion outside of our bedroom window. There's all these people waiting for a tram. We had a tram stop right underneath our apartment window, and there's a crazy racist drunk on the street, nearly assaulting a hijabi Turkish woman. Now, this hijabi Turkish woman is a German Turk of 2 generations, so she's actually a German.
Technically German, yeah.
Doing Hitler salutes on the street at this woman, yelling at her that, when we come to power, we're going to, kill all of you Muslims, etc. Outright. And all these Germans waiting on the tram, were watching all of this and not raising a finger until Roya and I stuck our head out the window, start screaming at this man, and then called the cops on him.
Right.
It took 2 years for this case to finally come before a court in Berlin. And it turned out during the hearing that this guy had a previous criminal record that nothing was done with, and they let him off on appeal, basically with a slap on his head, even though under German law and under the German constitution, Hitler salutes are illegal.
Yes, that's illegal.
White supremacist slurs, racist slurs like that are illegal. On and on and go. That's where it started. Now, this guy was living with some woman in that complex that we were living in. He only disappeared, I realized, at the tail end of 2018. We never saw this guy again. On top of that, Roya found out that there was an individual in that part of Pankow, in that part of Niederschönhausen, who was playing as being a lefty, but who was in fact a possible infiltrator for the AFD itself, within left-wing ranks in our area of Pankow.
Which is not quite unprecedented, regarding the cases of NSU, for instance.
This was happening all the time. On top of this, we had befriended the AFD whistleblower, Franziska Schreiber,
Franziska Schreiber, yes.
Wrote that tell-all book inside the AFD. And,
inside the AFD, yes.
You saw the pictures, the selfies and etc. that Roy and I were taking with this woman. So publicly, we were putting a big target on our back, and especially because whatever was happening on our street, on that street in Schillerstrasse, we had become the de facto Antifa within that street. So if there were attacks, if there were racist activities, if there were, all kinds of things, we would be the first to hear about it, and then we would pass on the information to other people in Berlin. And that district, just over a period of, I would say, about 6 years, went from being a very chilled out part of Berlin, a traditional part of Berlin, in fact, that was part of the Berlin Transportation Union during the 1930s. In fact, the hangar of the Straßenbahn, of the trams, occurred right on Schillerstrasse. This is where the 1932 general strike occurred, which is a historical event because it was the first time that you had, or the only time that you had, the KPD and the Nazis, the Deutsche Kommunistische Partei, the joining ranks together in a general strike against the Weimar system at the time. But under the DDR, this changed, and then after the DDR or the GDR, this district became what it became, and today that district is now in the hands of the AFD. On top of this, my own public anti-Dugan activism on social media against what was going on both in Iran in terms of the infiltration of the Dugan networks there, and also in Germany and how these people were being empowered. So we were taking on the fascists and the far right within Germany itself on multiple fronts. Then, the stuff that you and I were doing in late 2018 and early 2019, with those podcasts that we made about the Baha'i mafia, etc. All of this adds up, and all of this was actually taken into consideration by this gentleman from the Bundeskriminalamt, and they said that you are lucky that it took this long for something like that to happen. Because you have, in this climate, where you have a rise of the far right, where you have 90 seats in the Bundestag, the German parliament, what has happened since 2017, he explained to me, was that the AFD and sympathizers of the far right have been progressively infiltrating the institutions of the Bundesland, the province of Brandenburg itself. And he actually cited to me, he said that they have, strong belief that they had far-right sympathizers and even card-carrying members of the AFD going into the office of the Staatsanwaltschaft, the Berlin District Attorney's office. So he was not at all surprised. Now, the question is, what happened? Given the case of Alexei Navalny, now opens a door as to what possibly could have happened to Roya, right? We were out there, activists in North Berlin against all elements of the far right. And all these elements of the far right that are actually, in some sense, coordinated by the same set of actors. You know, the AfD has Russian support. And I know this for a fact because one of Alexander Dugin's, primary representatives in Germany, a gentleman by the name of Manuel Oxenreiter, we had even briefly befriended this guy until we realized what these Duginists were about, is basically Dugin's representative to the AfD. Okay. Then the docs blog that these people put up on me in late 2016 after the election of Donald Trump on this Fourth Revolutionary blog post or site, they were citing Baha'i stuff. And one of the things that they said, this poster said overtly, was that, that they had gone to the Baha'is to dig up dirt on me.
And Wahid, the Baha'is basically have taken side with Trump, right?
The Baha'is, the Iranian Baha'is, and a sizable portion of the Baha'i establishment, without overtly coming and saying so sometimes, although they do on social media, have taken sides with Trump, and that's over the issue of Iran. So it is not out of the realm of possibility, even in the way that this guy from the German Bundeskriminalamt said that there was collusion. Now, anybody who had followed my posts, in 2019 knows that in August of 2019, after 4 months of constantly petitioning the Berlin District Attorney's Office, they sent a coroner's report that makes no sense to any medical expert, any doctor, which made the claim, the specious claim, that my wife had passed away from a diabetic stroke. Now, I took that report together with a toxicologist report that actually contradicts the coroner immediately to our GP, or Roya's GP, who was also my GP. And he took a look at this and he couldn't believe what he was reading. He said, this is complete nonsense. This isn't what they're claiming in this is an impossibility, beginning with the factor that 2 months before Roya's passing, she had a blood test. She had done a full physical, and she was normal. In fact, the problems were with me rather than Roya. Her blood sugar levels were normal. There was no evidence of even an emerging diabetic condition or high blood sugar or anything like that. And this medically doesn't happen within a 2-month period. It can happen with someone who's normal, and then over a period of maybe 8 months to a year or 18 months, they develop a diabetic condition that then leads to lethal levels of possibly a diabetic stroke, but not in this particular case. This is impossible in 8 weeks for someone to go from normal to fatal. And it took them a couple of months to actually respond to the protest letter that our GP sent to the district attorney's office. And basically in it, they claimed that they were not obliged to actually find out the real cause of death, which then raises questions.
Seriously?
Yeah, they said it, which raises liability question, is that then what was the purpose of the autopsy? If you are not obliged to establish the cause of death, then why have an autopsy?
And by the way, Wahid, why forensic study was out of question? Why they didn't
the toxicologists immediately dismissed the conclusion of the coroner, and that toxicologist report came to the same batch as the coroner's report. Okay.
Well, you told me earlier that the police, refused to accept any sort of foul play, right?
And this is, a lot of this also has to do with the relationship that we had established with the local police. Just remember, in Berlin, maybe not in Pankow, but in Berlin generally, much of the police usually are coming from people with left-wing backgrounds. In other parts of Germany, it's different. But in Berlin City, and not in all cases, but in most cases, a lot of these officers on the ground and investigators, police investigators, come from a left-wing background. Now, what happened is that under German law, because of Roya's age, because she was quite young, and she was quite a healthy woman, under German law, the night when this happened, the police were obliged to investigate the first line of investigation would have been the spouse. right? So, the morning after they took Roya, I was expecting the police to come and interview me. They never showed up. And in fact, it later turned out that the police immediately dismissed any possible, link between, Roya's passing and anything that having to do with me.
But you didn't dismiss foul play, right?
I didn't dismiss foul play, and I even told them so, but the thing is that, because, this is the thing, these are all procedural things. So the police have to tick certain boxes, right? And the first box that they had to tick was whether or not, there was some kind of domestic violence issue involved and whatnot. They dismissed this within probably the first couple of hours, because upon the examination of Roya, when they took her to the ER at the Charité Hospital, there would have been police there, a police representative, and also a representative from the office of the district attorney, the Staatsanwaltschaft. Now, where this gets very funny, from a procedural matter, is that usually when someone is taken to the ER room, the same hospital is responsible then for the autopsy. The Charité Hospital is not a private institution; it's a public institution. But the office of the district attorney, the Staatsanwaltschaft, insisted in taking this file away from the Charité Hospital and into its own position. So it was the state coroner at another facility that then later examined Roya rather than the Charité Hospital. This is the first anomaly that occurs, right? And then, they're bottlenecking over the next 4 months with, after letter after letter, after phone call after phone call, for me to get a copy of the autopsy. Now, procedurally, the only way that the federal institutions, police institutions in Germany can get involved in a case like this is if I make a formal complaint that has a hearing, a court hearing, right? And I explored all of this, looking for lawyers, with the possibility of taking this. And even though there are certain cases that the German government will take on its own dime, in this particular case, I would have had to dish out quite a lot of money to an attorney to take this to a court. Now, at the time, were all these costs accumulating? We had the costs associated with the funeral, then the stone, then on and on. We were there. We were talking on a daily basis during that time. So, but where things started to get very strange is that after the summer, in late August, when my little one went back to school again, it was the attitude of the school and the kind of things that they were doing that then raised all kinds of flags. And it began to become very apparent to me that Nuri and I were no longer safe in Germany. And in fact, this officer from the Bundeskriminalamt said this to me outright, that you are not safe here, right?
Yes, that's true.
That you are being targeted. Now, as I mentioned before, this Alexei Navalny case, this Russian opposition leader, who ended up, incidentally, in the very same hospital that they took Roya to on March 12th, 2019, this case opens a window of opportunity of reopening the case with Roya.
That's right. So they managed by a sort of perfect method, right? And but back to Mr. Esmailpour, because in the wake of Roya's passing, we started corresponding with some members of the Baha'i mafia, and I asked a question. Actually, I brought up this case to Mr. Esmailpour, and to my surprise, this eloquent, soft-spoken guy suddenly turned tongue-tied. How so?
Because they know something. The Iranian Ministry of Intelligence are not stupid people. Even their low-level operatives like Esmailpour, they're not stupid. When you put all these facts together, it doesn't add up. And it doesn't add up at the very moment when you get the autopsy report, that this was not, just someone, just dying, but this was a homicide. Now, as I mentioned, Germany is a procedure-obsessed country. The German bureaucracy is obsessed with its own protocols. So unless you do A, B, C, and D, these other institutions don't act and do X, Y, and Z. But unfortunately, these times, all these sorts of things take money. Now, a homicide case is not, I mean, we don't have to close the file on this. There is a statute of limitations, but eventually, as more and more evidence is pieced together, I can actually take this back to German bodies, and to German lawyers, and force at least a court in Berlin to declare the autopsy to be nonsense. And once that, so in other words, they vacate the conclusion of the coroner. Once that is made, then I can go to another court and demand a criminal investigation into the passing of Roya. Because given all these various factors, given that we were, very open political dissidents against the far right at a time in Germany and in Berlin particularly, where there's a rise of the far right, and given that we were living in a district that went to the AfD, there is no question that a competent court that is, would take these factors into consideration and probably order, an investigation. Now, whether we get to the bottom of it or not remains to be seen. But just remember that Berlin, as the front line of the Cold War, and even in the period after the Cold War, these sorts of occurrences have been happening to various dissidents and people for a long time. The whole Mykonos affair, that occurred in Berlin, actually that Mykonos restaurant was only about 7-8 blocks away from where we were living.
That's true, yes, that's right, yes.
I showed it to you one time when we were on the tram. So it's not as if that these sorts of things have not happened before in Berlin, and we also know that, the Russians aside, but the American far right itself has had, and neo-Nazis have had a very conspicuous presence within Eastern Germany and East Berlin, particularly for a very long time, since the fall of the wall.
And do you believe that the Berlin police actually maybe has lost touch, with the skills required, to go through such a homicide?
It's not so much the skills. This is the way it was explained to me. The legislation, both on the provincial level and also on the federal level, has curtailed many of the powers of the police. That doesn't mean that you don't have corrupt police, heavy-handed police in Germany. But on the level of law, the amount of power that the police have in Germany have been significantly curtailed over a period of time, and particularly in a town like Berlin. So, when incidents like this occur, the police are only obliged to tick certain boxes. Now, if they wanted to make a big deal out of it, if the Berlin police itself was manned by these far rightists, they could have arrested me and framed me very easily for the murder of my wife, right? But that didn't happen because they
have you ever been interviewed, by the way? Have you ever been interviewed with the police?
They never came. This is what I find extremely suspicious. But this individual in the Bundeskriminalamt explained to me what could have happened in the local police not showing up to interview me. See, they were obliged to interview me by law. But they dropped that one. They didn't want to do it. And even though I called them specifically to tell them, look, I'm waiting for you guys to come here to interview.
Yeah, you raised some eyebrows, right?
Yeah, I want a statement, with the police about this. They never came. They just dropped the whole thing. And the only thing that they asked me to do, there was one officer that was regularly communicating with me during the week after Roya's passing. They wanted to know the arrangements for the funeral, because this was a protocol that they needed to know about. And that was it.
And for the time being, could you possibly chronicle, passing of Roya, to close this section of our interview?
On March 11th, Roya and my daughter Nuri had some errands to run. Nuri didn't go to school that week. She had a sick leave. They were doing various errands, doctor's appointments, shopping, etc. In the morning, Roya looked vibrant, perky, before they went out of the house. They didn't go very far, so they probably would have been within probably about a 4 or 5 mile radius of where we lived. They were shopping there, doctor's offices there. But Roya, when she went out, like most Germans, had to have her coffee and her, pastry. And according to Nouri, that day they stopped at 2 different bakeries, and Roya had 2 coffees and pastries that day. And then they came home later in the afternoon, but I would say about 3:30 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon. And I noticed that Roya looked extremely worn and tired. And at the time, I just attributed that to the fact that, that march was a very cold march, and also, that they've been running around all day long doing various
exhaustion,
things.
right?
Yeah, exhaustion. But she looked a lot more worn than she usually looked, and was very conspicuously different from the state that she had been in the morning when she went out. And my only conclusion is that during this period, from about 9 o'clock in the morning when they left the flat to about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they come back, something intervened. And more than likely, this would have been at one of these pastry shops that they stopped. Now, according to what we know of these sorts of poisons that the Russians have made, and the one that got Navalny apparently got it from a glass of water. So, possibly, this is what might conclude, in the commotion of these coffee shops. Just remember, Roya is with our daughter. Our daughter at the time is 6 years old, about 2 weeks away from her 7th birthday. Mothers are always distracted with their children. They turn around. It is very possible that Roya was followed, that Nouri and Roya were followed. And either in one or another of these bakery shops, something was put in. Now, from what we know of this agent that got Navalny, it only takes a few hours, 2 or 3 hours for it to start to work. He had a glass of water, even less, a glass of water in a hospital in Siberia, and on the plane, so about an hour later, on the plane, he got violently ill. So this is what would have happened. If anything, Roya, when she came home, she was so tired and so worn out. They went to bed around 8 o'clock at night, with the understanding that the next morning Roya would take Nouri to school, and then she had a little job to do for someone who hired her to do some kind of a website, and then they would go out about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then Roya would probably come back home about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would go pick Nouri up from school. Well, they went to bed around 11:30. I started to hear screaming and hysterics from the other room. Roya usually, would take Nouri to her bedroom to put her to sleep, and then would fall asleep herself. I always let her stay in Nouri's room. But that night, around 11:30, I started to hear hysterics and commotion. So I get up and go into the other room, and I try to revive Roya, and she's not getting up. Her body was warm, but she had no. There was nothing. There was no respiration. I gave her CPR, nothing. So then I called our neighbor downstairs, a Ukrainian gentleman who was a medic, and luckily it was his night off. He came up immediately, and he did the CPR as well, nothing, so we immediately called the ambulance. It took them about half an hour to get to our flat, and then once they arrived, it's recorded. I don't know where I got cut off. I was basically saying that at 11:30, due to hysterics and crying from the other room, in Nouri's room, I went to the room, and Roya wouldn't get up. Her body was warm, but she had no respiration, so I gave her CPR. It didn't work.
She was unresponsive, right?
Completely. There was no respiration, and she had no heartbeat. That was one of the first things that I noticed, is that there was no pulse. So I called our neighbor downstairs, who was a medic, a Ukrainian gentleman and his family. He came up and did nothing, so we called the ambulance. About 30 minutes later, the ambulance arrives at our flat, and so they go through the whole motions of trying to revive her. They put her on a portable electrocardiogram. They injected her through her
adrenaline, right?
No response. They took her. Now, on the way out, the chief medic of this crew of ambulance people, for very weird. All of a sudden, had to go at me trying to blame me for what had happened to Roya. And I just told them to buzz off. So they took.
Well, it carries a conspicuous Russian signature.
Whose last name was actually Russian. Anyway, so they took Roya. They took her to the Charité hospital, and about an hour after that, I get the telephone call from the hospital that Roya had passed away and that they had declared her gone. And that the hospital was obliged to inform the police, and I said fine. And basically we waited around for the rest of the morning, for the police to show up when they never did. And then at that point, Nuri and I went to the hospital, where they had taken Roya. We didn't see Roya again until the funeral about 23 days later. And that's what happened. And, this was an absolute nightmare. The last thing that one would consider happening to one's loved one. Roya was a perfectly healthy German woman. There was nothing wrong with her. But this is what happened. And given all these various factors, our anti-fascist activism, our activism against the Baha'is, etc. In one sense, we had become a sitting duck, and Germany, for all its pretensions to the contrary, is not as safe as it looks. So, if any of these American left-wing activists are listening, I understand that a lot of people think that, exiling yourself to Berlin is the way to go during the era of Trump. You may want to reconsider that, because the far right in Germany is just as deadly and powerful as it is in the United States. They maybe not make the same kind of circus waves that the Americans do, although they do from time to time. But they're there, and they have infiltrated the German institutions locally as well as federally, all throughout.
Yes, they're there and yet to catch up, right?
Yeah.
And you believe that, right? Basically, you believe that the police seem to be more of, incompetent. Than
well, the incompetence they are. But the incompetence has to do, like I said, with the lack of resources. Number one. Number two is because of all the legislation that has been passed through both the federal level of the German government and also on the local level.
So do you suggest that their hands were tied?
Well, this is what the Bundeskriminalamt said to me. They said their hands are tied. They cannot investigate anything unless I jump through the hoops of X, Y, and Z. Which means
is it likely, Wahid, is it really likely that one day we finally see the case cracks open?
Inshallah, but it will require money and resources, which I'm open to.
Compile huge, compelling evidence.
Yeah,
right.
that something is, like I said, the first thing that needs to happen is basically a German court to declare the autopsy to be erroneous, to be unfactual, to vacate.
What was your gut? What was your gut telling you back then? When
my gut was telling me, the first thing my gut told me when I saw Roya in the state is, oh no, they got her. Because about a week before, Roya came to me at the dinner table. He said, you know what? I feel there's something targeting us. And I told her, well, then, we need to take extra precautions, given the experiences that we've had on the street, then we need to take extra precautions. You need to be extra vigilant. I got her to put mace in her purse, and I also encouraged her that if you're going to go out with Nuri, that, why don't you, either call a girlfriend or someone to come with you, so there's more than two people. It's not just you and Nuri, but there's somebody else there as witness. Try to be in crowded areas, go with the Straßenbahn, obviously, and make sure the Straßenbahn is fully, packed. Try to sit at the front of the train, etc. Avoid, streets and alleys that seem to be uncrowded, etc. But as we know, a sophisticated assassination plot of the kind that got Alexei Navalny, it doesn't require that. All it requires someone to follow you, and if they're trying to poison you, the only thing that they need to do is just to basically brush something off something you're eating, and the chemicals do the rest.
Yes, as simple as that. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And what are you doing now? You know.
Well, we've been in Australia, since December of last year, and basically caught into this whole COVID lockdown situation. So I haven't been able to do much with Roya's case because of it, and particularly because the Germans and the Australians are too busy with this COVID. But I did pass on a dossier through the police here to the Australian Federal Police, so that my views about the passing of Roya are on record with Australian authorities, which they are. And we will see, maybe one day, especially after this whole COVID thing is over, I will be able to find a good attorney and the funds with it to be able to reopen this case, to find out what happened to Roya.
And last question. A lead came forward. I'm talking about the letter, attributed to certain one, Mr. Nathan Abukire. Tell me about that.
Well, this was the confession that
there was a hoax or some serious.
Well, hoax or not, that the actual content of what is claimed in the letter, I believe, is factual. Now, whether he himself wrote this or somebody else wrote it for him,
because he said Wahid has been pranked. Well, he said it was a stupid prank.
Pranked or not, on the internet, all kinds of things happens. But the things that he says in that letter, or whoever wrote that letter, are factual, right? So the Azalis, us, the Baha'i community, are an enemy of the Baha'is, right?
That's right. Yes.
The Duganists themselves are on record for being in contact with the Baha'is. That blog post on the Fourth Revolutionary blog site is evidence. Now, whether these people think it's a prank or not, in a legal setting, that blog post and the statements in it are admissible as statements within a court of law. So, given this, there is no doubt in my mind that there was a collusion between the far right and the Baha'is, with the Baha'i supplying, or the Baha'i organization supplying a bulk of information to these people, right? As a way to shut myself up primarily, and to hurt my family. Now, they have done this before to other people, the Baha'is, and the far right obviously has a monumental record of doing these sorts of things.
And it was interesting that he tried to ward off the accusation of murder, but he didn't do anything.
Look, I confronted on Telegram Farzam Kamal Abadi, the big fish himself, about this last year before we left. And he didn't give a patent denial.
Right.
Like all of these people, right? And you were telling me that someone that you had overheard in a restaurant in Frankfurt, some Iranian Baha'i basically claiming that they should begin killing and murdering covenant breakers.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes. So they didn't deny it, quite obviously. That's did it raise red flags for you?
It raises a lot of, and I've kept all the evidence of this. One day, if this matter comes to the attention of a court of law, all of these things are going to be interrogated and looked at.
And keep in mind that the guy, truly alleges that the Baha'i internet agencies got a lot on you.
Well, what do they have? I mean, the best that they can do is just with silly juvenile accusations and this, that, and the other thing, They've got nothing. I've always been transparent, but just remember this. Roya was a seasoned activist of several decades. Roya was born into a left-wing family in Munich. Her late mother, Anna Noser, was a lifelong member of the German Communist Party, the KPD, in Munich. Roya, as a teenager, remembers where she would pass out flyers in Munich, right across the street from the Beer Braukeller, where Hitler began the Munich push of 1923. When she moved to the UK, Roya, as a consequence of a personal tragedy where a extremely corrupt UK family court took her daughter away and gave it to a pedophile, which seems to be a business as usual in the United Kingdom these days. Roya became a very seasoned anti-pedophile activist in Europe. Now, she came at this from a left-wing position rather than this right-wing position that these lunatic QAnonists are pursuing. These were documented issues of pedophile networks within the system in the United Kingdom, and especially in the court system in the United Kingdom itself. So she had also made herself a target to these people as well. But in the last couple of years, most of our activism was against the far right and then the Baha'is.
Right.
So, the question that always has to be asked in situations like this, qui bono, who benefits? Obviously, the far right, the German far right, obviously the Baha'is, and also these, British and European pedophile networks that Roya was exposing extremely well.
And by the way, Wahid, there's something just popped up. Roya was evidently stalked by a Baha'i, a very big fish Baha'i, Hajir Bahamin, once or twice.
And just where it's very strange when he did it, not that he did it, but when he did it. She was stalked on her own Facebook page by this guy, and I have the screenshots of it. When we started putting up selfies with this Franziska Schreiber, the anti.
Oh yes, I remember.
AFD whistleblower, yeah. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, shows up Hajir Bahamin, and starts to spam a thread on Roya's Facebook wall where she's put a picture of herself.
And we both know he's working for the Baha'i Internet Agency.
No question about it. And this guy is, in my opinion, a bit of a unstable actor. He is absolutely obsessed. He's obsessed with Bayanis and Azalis, believing that everyone, there are Azalis under every rock. So he's constantly trying to find the identity of people, within Iranian history or even the contemporary times who may be closet or undercover Azalis. This guy's a complete nutcase.
Right, you think that the whole body of Baha'i Internet Agency purports to be some sort of witch hunt? This
is a corporate organization, a very authoritarian corporate organization, and they have had a lot of problems, and especially in a country like Germany that has a history of the Baha'is being kicked in the backside by the German system itself. Let's remember Francesco Ficicchia, a gentleman, Swiss-Italian gentleman who wrote in German several very good books against the Baha'is, was a personal friend of Roya's and mine. We were communicating with this gentleman since 2015. Ficicchia was responsible through his book in getting the German government, first of all, the German Council of Protestant Churches, to bring a complaint to the German government about the Baha'is and have them deregistered from the religious status. So from
on the grounds of felony, right?
Well, on the grounds of not, I'm not sure if it was felony. It was on the grounds of legal misrepresentations. Because under the German Constitution, if you subscribe to certain points of view,
and by the way, the lack of clarity in financial transactions
and lack of transparency and clarity in financial matters, all of this forced the West German government of the time on the petition brought to it by the West German Council of Protestant Churches in 1982, I believe. The West German government revoked the religion status of the Hyphen Baha'i organization and basically relegated them up until 2014 to an NGO status. So from about 1982, 1983 to 2014, when a Stuttgart court reinstated their religion recognition status in Germany, the Baha'is were in a no man's land acting as a lobby group, as a non-governmental organization.
That's right.
So you put all of these factors together, and given who we were in contact with, and particularly because we actually Roya wrote a letter when we found out about this administrative court, reconsidering giving back the Baha'is, the Haifan Baha'is, their religion. Roya actually wrote to the court clerk office about this case. It's a 5-6 page letter. I think we may still have a copy of this somewhere. I'll have to look for it, where she basically protested that this court needs to look at various things, that there are outstanding complaints against this organization, that they are not completely out of the woods where the German Constitution is concerned on the issues that had their religion recognition status revoked in 1982, 1983. We never heard back from the court. All we heard back was that in around the summer of 2014 that this status was reinstated. But that letter exists in the clerk's court office. Then on top of that, when I had gone to the UK in 2011, Roya actually had one of her emails hacked by one of these people.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Who then sent all this kind of defamatory spam about me to her. So this is the thing. These Baha'i cultists, like most of these right-wing authoritarian groups, they seek to destroy their enemies by isolating their enemies. When these people found out that Roya and I were in a relationship, then later got married, this was a real blow to the efforts and activities of the Baha'i Internet Agency, because that basically proved that they had failed in isolating me. They had tried to isolate me amongst my own family. Most of these people I cut off because most of this extended family of Baha'is in the United States are, in my opinion, a bunch of right-wing fools. But with Roya and myself, they didn't succeed. So this was a problem, and particularly given that Roya was a journalist for The Guardian for some years, and also had some vast contacts within the university establishment of the UK. She introduced me to the philosopher of science, Simon Schaeffer, a very saintly individual, very well read, and actually the nemesis of Richard Dawkins. Simon Schaeffer has time and again challenged Dawkins to a debate on several of his points in the God delusion, and Dawkins has turned him down. But Simon Schaeffer was the person then responsible for giving me the letter of recommendation that allowed me to go for 8 weeks to the manuscript reading room of Cambridge University and look through the manuscripts of E.G. Brown, his 60-plus volumes of Bobby Baha'i works. It was thanks to that, my relationship with Roya's friendship with Schaeffer, who was a major academic at Cambridge University, opened that door to me and allowed me to look at this. Now, these Baha'i cultists, when they're looking at this, all their alarm bells are going off, because they will stop at nothing to destroy the lives of their political enemies. And we have so much evidence for that. They did this to Alvare, they did it to Sobhi, they tried to do it to Fichikia himself.
Even to Ahmad Sohrab.
And to Ahmad Sohrab. Some of the stories that Fichikia was telling Roya and I about, things that they had attempted and how to destroy his credibility and reputation in public. This boggles the mind. We asked him why he never considered bringing any kind of a defamation case, either in a Swiss or German court. And, the response was the same, that, these sorts of cases can become prohibitive, and especially when you're dealing with an organization such as the Haifan Baha'is with deep pockets like theirs, it becomes an uphill battle. Nevertheless, every dissident, every critic who has been a part of them and has then cut their ties from these cultists is always met by the same thing. Now, in my case, as far as these Baha'is are concerned, and as that letter specified, they consider me to be enemy number one.
Yes.
And for a variety of reasons.
More of it, nemesis, arch enemy.
Yeah, arch enemy.
And the guy took a lot of pride in it. That he actually he went against you, and he was encouraged, by the Baha'i mafia, by the Baha'i leaders actually. And I believe by framing the whole Baha'i mafia in a set of simpleton, organization and assemblies, is a huge mistake.
Well, we have been saying this for the last couple of years in public in those podcasts that we made, and it's, I think, time for other people to take it seriously. The problem is that in countries like in Western European countries, and more so, especially in these Anglo-Saxon Five Eyes countries, so the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK. This organization is so firmly entrenched within these establishments that unless you have something very substantial, it's very difficult to pull these people down. Nevertheless, by the same token, they're also constrained by the kind of things that they can do in these countries. So they always have to do things from behind the scene. They try to set people up, or they throw other actors forward to do their dirty deeds with them. And this is how we know. And actually, this guy from the Bundeskriminalamt agreed with me that it's very possible that the Baha'is were using the far right as a proxy. And this has been going on for a long time. Now, you found something, I remember back in 2019, showing that a former member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Germany, this Udo Schäfer,
right,
was actually seen at a AfD rally in about 2015.
Oh, yes, yeah. 2014, yes.
Yeah.
Shortly before his death, yes.
Yeah, shortly before his death. So this proves right there that there is a proximate relation. There is some kind of a relationship between
the AfD proximity, a propinquity between.
Yeah.
And the Baha'i, you think a Baha'i community, among the Baha'i community, there is, strong trace of, right-wing inclinations, right? What is the main political inclination, that stuck with the Baha'is, strike a chord with the Baha'is? Is that, a neoliberal or neoconservative ideology?
I would say neoliberalism in their economic view of the world, but right-wing authoritarianism in their political view of the world. And this is why you have had all these Iranian Baha'is jumping on the Trump bandwagon, even though you have a lot of these white, liberal, middle-class American, Canadian, and European Baha'is, where Trump represents the antithesis of everything they claim they believe. But yet, as we're witnessing, and as I kind of tried to indicate last night with Stephen and Matt, the Baha'i administration, the Baha'i leadership, rather than jumping in and refereeing between these people, is actually encouraging these Trumpists amongst the Iranians. Why? Because, as we know, Trump, as one of his stated goals, is regime change in Iran.
That's right. Yes. So this makes them not a pacifist religion, right?
No, of course they're not a pacifist religion. They're not. Even from the point of view of their own pseudo scripture in the Kitab al-Aqdas, which I have labeled Kitab al-Aqfas, the book of the greatest cage. Carrying arms. Pacifism is. Mirza Hossein Ali Nouri was not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination. They want Iran. They want power in Iran. They have been, scheming for years, even during the time of the Shah himself, in taking power in Iran. And if Donald Trump and these, Likudnik Zionists that Donald Trump is associated with, and even the Russians are promising something to that effect, then these people will jump on the bandwagon and everything else be damned. And it's not as if it's recent. It's not even with the election of Donald Trump. They have been associated with the most warmongering elements of the Republican Party in the United States. Ronald Reagan, elevated the status of these people during his presidency.
And became a hero to them, actually.
Yeah, became a hero to them, and the evidence, it goes on and on and on. So the rhetoric is actually meaningless from many vantage points.
Right.
They are not pacifists, and they're an extremely savvy, as an organization I'm talking about, not as individuals. As an organization, they're extremely savvy, and they rub shoulders with some of the worst actors, imperial actors, on the world stage.
And by the way, speaking of individuals, what happened, in your opinion, to Roya's friends, who suddenly turned out to be crabby, after her passing, actually,
They got scared. A lot of these people got scared.
They got scared.
These were a lot of the activists from amongst, the anarchists and also the Antifa community throughout Germany that were associated with us. Some of these people, we actually, housed them during the aftermath of the G7 because they were on the run from the German police in Hamburg because of what happened during that whole fracas in the G8. But these people got scared, and we didn't hear from these people after Roya passed away. None of them showed up for Roya's funeral.
Because they were on good terms with you yourself personally.
Yeah, they were all on good terms with me, but they got scared. And this is the thing about the left, the European left, is that there's a lot of people that talk a lot, but when it comes to actual, real, tangible solidarity, they always come short. And the first principle of anti-fascism is solidarity, and ability to create a community where people are, cooperating with each other on a range of things. So there's community support. This is one of the first principles of anti-fascism. And a lot of these leftists in Europe are more concerned with issues that have to do below the belt than actually fighting fascism on the streets and protecting their own comrades. Not all of them. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of the people that came into our orbit were like that. Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Okay, thank you very much, Wahid. Thanks for spending time with me. It was always nice talking to you. Hopefully, in the following podcast, we can capture, the whole story, in more details and in greater depth.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.